It's summer here in the Pacific Northwestern United States, and everyone wants to get out to the beach. My son, in particular, is really excited because he's been watching this show with a kid who has a lucky shovel. So, I'm gonna make him one. I found a shovel model online I'll link to in the description below, and I'm gonna sandcast it. I know some of you are thinking, casting probably isn't the best method to make this, but I know I can make it work with casting, and I've been wanting to cast something lately anyway. So yeah, here's the shovel, and well, the parts off the printer are pretty rough. Like, these layer lines are just egregious, and so I'm gonna need to take care of those. I'm gonna start off with sanding, but the way I'm really gonna approach this problem is with UV resin meant for 3D printing. So I'm gonna use this UV light hooked up to a foot pedal. And you want to make sure that you use nitrile gloves when you're handling this resin, since it'll dissolve other plastic gloves and the resin is toxic. This is the resin I'm going to be using, just some really basic, cheap UV resin. I'll get this all mixed up. And I'll go ahead and add in some baby powder to help fill in the layer lines better. This is a technique I got from a video by Dave Rig Design that I'll link to in the description. So I'll go ahead and apply the resin, and then I'll shine the light. Two important things about working with this resin. One, it's toxic like I said, so I'm wearing a respirator and working in a well-ventilated space while I'm doing all this. And two, this UV light is harmful to your eyes, so I'm using adequate protection for that. Afterwards, I'm using some isopropyl alcohol to clean things up. And after this resin is cured, I'm going to go ahead and apply some shellac and some paste wax, and these are going to help the pattern release from the mold. Next up is the core, and the reason we're going to need this is because our shovel socket has that hole for the handle. This is a core box I designed based on that shovel model. So what I'm going to be doing is filling this core box with core sand. It has these nuts and bolts on there to keep it tight when packing. This is just finely sifted silica sand, but the special part is the sodium silicate here, also known as water glass. That's what's going to harden up the casting sand so the core can stay in place in the shovel socket while I'm casting. So here I'm just mixing it up, and you'll see it kind of holds shape, but not really that well. So I'm going to go ahead and pack it down inside of my core box here and make sure it holds shape. Then I'll tap it with this wrapping tool and try to make sure that it comes out in one piece. Whew. Then I'll go ahead and bake it. There are a couple of ways to harden up sodium silicate. Baking is probably the easiest way. Another way is using carbon dioxide, but I couldn't get that to work with a hacked together baking soda and vinegar setup, so baking just worked a lot better for me. And after only a few minutes, the cores are done. I should mention I made multiple cores at once so that I could have multiple attempts, not because the part itself needs multiple cores. And yeah, these are nice and hard now. There is that line we have to take care of though, so I'll go ahead and sand it off. Next up, we're actually going to mold the part. This is my casting flask. It's definitely seen better days, for reasons I'll explain in just a minute. So first I'll go ahead and flip the drag, basically the bottom, and I'll insert that core into the center hole of the shovel here. I'm also inserting just a little piece of plastic up top for the ingate where the metal comes into the mold cavity. And here's some baby powder, which I'm using for my parting powder. And then just kind of a simple kitchen sieve. I use this as a riddle to make sure that the surface finish of the casting isn't just complete garbage. And here I'm packing it down. I'm going to use my sand rammer to make sure that the edges are especially packed in there nice and tight. And then I'll just go ahead and strike it off. My sand here is a little drier than I'd like. It doesn't quite have the green strength I'd like, so eventually I'll need to mull it with some bentonite clay. And here I'm just using a modified spoon to do what's called cutting down. I'm cutting down because this part has sort of an irregular parting line. The whole pattern doesn't just have a single parting line here at the top of the shovel. The socket for the shovel kind of goes down at an angle, so we need to cut down to make sure that we hit that parting line. I'm adding some parting powder, and then I'll just dust off to make sure that we get a little bit better finish. Now we'll go ahead and add the sprue and a riser. These are just 3D printed patterns, nothing really special about them. I should probably sand them down smooth someday, but for now they're just regular printed patterns. And I'll go ahead and sift some more sand onto this. Then we're gonna make sure everything is packed nice and tight. Fill it up to the top. And we'll strike off the top. Here I'm removing my riser very poorly. It doesn't really matter if the sand falls in at this point. Next up, we'll cut the pouring basin. This tool is really just a piece of kitchen drain pipe. I find this works way better than trying to use the cutoff spoon. It gives much sharper edges. I got this technique from Tobo Mott. He's a great dude and super knowledgeable about metal casting. I'll link his channel in the description. And here I just pulled out the sprue, making sure to pull it out nice and straight, and adding some parting here. And here's this artist's tool. It's called a trowel palette knife. I find that these are really nice for cutting these edges here on the pouring basin, although I don't do a great job here. But more credit to Tobo Mott for telling me about this tool. And we're going to go ahead and kind of round out the top transition here. This is going to help not entrain air as we pour metal. And I'm putting some part down here to make sure that we hit the right place at the bottom of the sprue where it meets the runner. And last, I'm kind of rounding out the transition here from the sprue to the runner. This is going to make for hopefully less turbulence and less air entrainment as the metal hits the bottom. And just cutting a couple of paths for the metal to flow into my riser. And then we're using this wrapping tool to remove the actual pattern from the mold. I have to pull it out at kind of an angle because of the way that the core is placed. And it feels sort of like playing a game of Operation. Here's my core, and I have this little nail with one side cut off. I'm going to go ahead and use that to set the core into the mold so that way it can stay at the right angle when we pour the metal. And we'll go ahead and do a trial close. Put a little bit more part down there to make sure we actually hit the runner correctly. Everything looks okay. So we'll go ahead and close up one more time. Now we get to pouring, and I ended up using a zinc aluminum alloy called ZA27. Previously, I had wanted to use aluminum bronze, but I just could not get the part to fill. Maybe if I had some phosphor copper shot, I could have got it to run, but I just had failure after failure after failure. I must have poured this thing about 6 times. Leave a comment below if you have any tips for getting aluminum bronze to run in really thin sections like this. So anyway, that's when I switched to ZA27. I knew that this would just be much better at filling the mold. Problem is, it's been a while since I worked with this stuff, and I'd forgotten that, Well, because it has zinc in it, if you take zinc up too far beyond its melting temperature, then it'll actually boil away, which is what's happening here. These fumes are toxic, so I made sure to get out of the way really quickly, but just keep in mind that if you're working with zinc or zinc aluminum alloys, you want to keep the temperature down and work in a really well ventilated area with the respirator. So here's my second attempt, and furnace none the worse for wear. And finally, the pour. So then we open up the mold and looks like we got a complete casting. Cool. Using the portaband here to cut off the gating. Here's where things really went south. I kinda cut into the side of the shovel. But I'm just gonna work with it. So now comes the tedious process of cleaning this whole thing up. A lot of sanding, a whole bunch of Dremel work here. I didn't try to make this thing look perfect. I wanted it to kind of look hand done, and besides, it's going to be used by a kid. Then we go to shaping the handle. I used some of this dust to fill in the cracks on that handle. The wood wasn't perfect and there were some like bug holes or something in there, so I just made some wood filler out of the dust and some wood glue. I sanded it, used some mineral spirits, and ended up finishing with some boiled linseed oil and with some shellac. Then I joined the handle to the shovel body using some epoxy. Making sure to clean it all up here. And this is what it looks like. Feels pretty nice in the hand. And here it is compared to the original pattern. Quite a bit smaller. So yeah, only one thing left to do, and that's test it out at the beach. I think it'll do the job. So yeah, that's the lucky shovel I cast for my son. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like, and for more content like this, think about subscribing and hitting that bell for notifications on upcoming videos. And until next time, keep tinkering.